Hello, this is Matthew Oates with Salient Process. In this video, I'm going to create a brand new process application from scratch. I'm going to use Spark Ignition Toolkit. I'm going to use the Spark UI Toolkit. Remember, Spark UI is getting built into IBM BPM here in the next few months. And then I'm just going to use the Web Process Designer. So these are all things that, with the Spark products and IBM BPM, just the features that come built in with IBM BPM, we can quickly create a process. So I think we're going to, in this video, kind of go from scratch. I'll think of things that we can talk about and as I go along. And I haven't actually ever created the process I'm about to create. So it's going to be flying by the seat of our pants, but it's going to be great because it's really easy to build these processes with the Spark products and IBM BPM. So Interconnect is coming up. Interconnect 2017 is coming up this week. So why don't I create a process for maybe getting approvals to go to Interconnect. I have the process portal here. So I already have Spark Ignition installed. You know what? Why don't I go to the Process Center here? And we have some process applications. Why don't I create a new process application? So let's see. Let's call this the Interconnect Approval Process, and IAP. All right. So I'm creating a new process application. Yep, this is good. When I use a browser-based process center, it's going to create a process application and send me right into the Web Process Designer. So we have Interconnect Approval Process. So the first thing I want to do is add my Spark Ignition and Spark UI dependencies here. So I'm going to go ahead and do Spark Ignition. I will use, let's see, I'll use this one. So it's going to add that dependency, and you know what, I want Spark UI as well. So I'll pick this one. All right, and I'm not going to need the responsive coaches, so I will remove that dependency as well. All right, so our toolkits are all set here. Let's make sure our process application is pointing to the theme that comes within Spark UI, so we'll have that saved. All right, so my process application is all set up to start using Spark Ignition and Spark UI. Let's go ahead and create the process. So let's do this, and I'm going to call it, you know what, I'll just call it the Interconnect Approval here. Let's see, let's keep it simple so this video doesn't take too long here. We're going to do, you know what, let's have two swim lanes here. Maybe we have we can have the employee swim lane and the manager swim lane. Okay, so that's good. And then let's go ahead and, you know, let's have a three-step process here. So I'm going to say, here's the user task, and let's say this is the request. And then we'll say, you know, so we'll say request trip, and we'll say trip approval, and we'll say maybe trip confirmation. All right, so we have three steps here. Let's go ahead and throw some decision gateways on here. I bet you there's going to be one here and one here. And by the way, you'll notice Spark Ignition and Spark UI, we're going to be using the diagram features of IBM BPM, right? So a Salient process product design principle is works with IBM, which means if IBM can do it, we want to use that feature of IBM BPM instead of recreating things. So there's no modeling that's done with some other kind of approach here. We're going to use the modeling that's built into the product. Same thing with business objects you'll see in a bit. And UI. We're actually gonna be using IBM BPM instead of some maybe third-party approach to doing UI. So here we go. We're gonna have this, and we're gonna maybe have, let's have one more endpoint here. That's just gonna be, a cancel, right? So we have our process here. So someone will request a trip. We kind of look what the end result is. So we'll say result here. Let's say this is going to be cancel. This is going to be approve, or this is going to be complete. And then here, if it's approved, we'll call this approve, and we'll call this deny. And this is going to be the decision. All right, so we have our basic process here. I'm going to go ahead and save this so we don't lose it here. Let's, let's create some teams. Again, we can create teams really easily by just using the features of IBM BPM, right? So we could create this new team here, the employee team. I'm going to go ahead and just add myself here to this, and I'm going to save that. All right, so I'm done with the employee team. You know what? I want to create another team. I'll create managers. And you know what? I'm just going to be a manager as well. All right, so you can set anyone in any team here. So what we want to do then is map those teams to these swim lanes. So the manager team needs to go to managers, and the employee team needs to go to the employees that I just created. All right, so we have swim lanes here. We have these steps in the process. Let's see what the default implementation is. Okay, so the default implementation is these default human services. So let's actually just check out what this ends up looking like. We're going to see that we're going to need to extend this a little bit more, especially with Spark Ignition and Spark UI, but we might as well just check out what this looks like. So why don't I first start by exposing this to employees. All right, so I've exposed this to employees. That's good. I think everything's squared away. Since I'm kind of doing this on the fly, we might run into some hiccups, but that's realistic. So that's kind of what I want to do in this video. So let's see, I'm going to log out of my process portal, and I'll log back in. All right, good. We see interconnect approval here. So why don't I start this process? It's going to say work started for this. It's going to say request trip. And if we look at this task, it's probably not going to render with something that's particularly useful. Yeah, so it's just going to be the default service. So this isn't what we want to see. We want to see something a little bit cleaner than this. So I'm not going to worry about that for now. So let's actually take a look at the Spark Ignition. So Spark Ignition has a different default set of default services. So actually I'm going to copy, you know what, first let's just use the default Ignition service that comes with this. So here we go. It's going to look something like this. Why don't I go ahead and just instead implement this process. Instead of having the heritage human service, I'm going to go to the default Ignition service here. So I'll do this. I'll do this. All right, so now I have different implementations for each of my processes. It's just going to point to a service, a human service that's in the Ignition toolkit. So if I run this again, we're going to see a slight improvement here, but it's actually not going to show us anything useful yet because we haven't told Spark Ignition exactly what needs to show up. So it's going to have this here, and it's going to probably say that we need an activity template defined for request trip to make sure we can render this coach correctly. It's going to take a little bit to load here, and actually while that's doing that, let me just double check here. Yep. All right. So see, it's going to say there's no activity found for this trip. That's because you need to actually set in Spark Ignition what needs to be shown for request trip, okay? So to do that, you want to make sure you're a Spark Ignition admin. Check out the other videos or documentation to know how to make sure that setting is correct for your environment. But if I go here, maintain activities, this is a Spark Ignition dashboard. And so this is how we're going to manage what shows up on our activities. So if we go to list activities here, we're going to see there's 4 here in an example. What I want to do is actually create a new one. So I'm going to create a new activity. Let's see, what was the first step? I think it was called request trip. All right, so I have this here. It's going to have a complete, postpone. You know what? Let's have a cancel here. Let's say this activity allows Salient process employees to request a trip to interconnect. All right, so we have a description here. That's good. Reference, maybe we can Google interconnect 2017. All right, so we can maybe put this home page here. It's a really long, it's probably because it's a Google search. Let's just go, let's get a little bit shorter one. Not that it really matters one way or another, but this just is a little bit more readable. All right, so we have, let's add a link here. Let's say this is interconnect and say the interconnect home page. And then say we can say interconnect 2017. You know what? Let's test this to see if it works. Yep, it does work. Very good. So we have reference here. We have a to-do, and we can say request the trip from your manager. We can say provide your name, dates of arrival and departure, and reason for going. And we'll say that that's required. So we're good here. We're not going to worry about document support, but I could certainly enable that. Actually, you know what? Why don't I go ahead and just enable that to show the section. I'm going to save this. And then let me preview this. So here we go. Yeah, this looks good. I'm going to have the reference here. I could request the trip from my manager. We could have documents if we want to. Okay, that's good. You know, we can complete, make suggestion. Excellent. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And I'm going to go back. So now I should see request trip as one of the activities that I could say, you know what, my process needs to do that. So I'm going to save this name. Then I'm going to go back to here. And if we look at data mapping, we're actually going to see that this is where I can just put that name. And now next time I run this process, it's not going to say, hey, I need an activity template. It's going to let me know, you know what? I know the request trip activity template needs to show this information, so it's going to show it to the end user. I'm going to go ahead as well and set up my private variable. This keeps up with the result of an activity, so now I can just map that to action here, and we'll keep up with that. All right, so I'm just going to do the first one now. We'll need to do the subsequent activity templates to make sure the whole process can work correctly. But now that I've done that, why don't I go back here, and we will run it again. All right, so we have a new one here. If I go to this, I'm going to claim this. All right, and so instead of having that prompt saying I need to know what's going to be displayed, it's now going to display this information here. So we're good with this first step. So it's going to say request the trip. It's going to tell me what to do and the details that I need to do this, and you know, I can complete this. So that's great. So let's keep improving this process by adding new templates and looking at the decision gateway logic. So if we have this, let's start with this. So we want to make sure, so you saw the action object that comes out of an activity template, we can see action here. So this is the same thing that gets evaluated here. So if I say, let's go ahead and just select action. So if action equals cancel, so we have that. And then let's go ahead and make this. So this is the default ignition service. That is very good. Let's go ahead and create some other templates here. We had request trip. I want to say trip approval. And I'll just add a to-do here that says review and decide on trip. Say review the requested dates and reason from employee and make a decision. All right, so we have a to-do here. We'll say trip approval. I'm going to go ahead and just have this is interconnect 2017 trip approval. And instead of postpone and complete, I'm going to have approve, deny here, right? Because at a different step in my process, I want different options. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, and I'm going to preview this. And we'll see, okay, it's different here, different options, very good. All right, so trip approval is now ready to go. We'll have a trip confirmation here. And I'll just say review your confirmed request. I can say your request was confirmed. So book your travel. How about book travel? That makes more sense for this to do here. So we're going to do this. This is just going to be a complete and postpone. That's fine. So we're just keeping things basic here for now. We can always add more detail after the fact if we want to. But we have trip confirmation, and we have trip approval now created. So I'm going to go back to here. And I'm going to say, you know what, this is going to be trip confirmation. And this is going to say, oh, no, that one's going to be trip approval. And this is going to be trip confirmation. All right, and let's go ahead and just map to the action here. That last one doesn't necessarily matter, but this one will, because we need to know if it's approved or denied. All right. So we should have our process here. We might run into a few bugs. I'm only human, so I might have forgotten something here. You know what? Let's make sure we do this. I would have forgotten here. So this is going to be the action equals approve. All right. So let's see if this worked. We're going to go here. We're going to start, and let's, you know what? Let's start a new process. So I'm going to say request the demo. We have, oh, that's the wrong process. Let me do interconnect approval. We have this request trip here. All right, we have our first step. You know what, if I press complete, it's not going to let me go forward here because this is required, so that is very good. So now I'm going to press complete. Trip approval, good, that's going to managers, so this is very good. So we have trip approval. If we look at where we're at in our process, we can always do that up here, view process diagram. Let's see, we're down here, so that's good. We're going to go back to our task, and you know what, to test this, why don't I go ahead and press deny here. So I'm going to say let's deny this request. So we could review the request that was sent to me, and I'll deny it. All right, good. It goes back to the employee to request the trip. So it's going back here. And as you're going through and you're seeing me do this, right, you're seeing this is helpful in terms of just knowing who needs to do what. And so that's kind of the first pass that we're going to do. And then once we go through and test to make sure our process is working, then we're going to extend this to maybe in IBM BPM capture the name and the dates of arrival and the reason for going. But for now, I'm just testing the process. I'm making sure my activity templates are all configured correctly. So we have trip approval. This is very good. Review and decide on trip. Excellent. So we're going to continue here. Let's go ahead and do approve. This should go to trip confirmation. Yep, there we go. So it's back to the employee, and it's going to show them the information for trip confirmation, which is book your travel. Excellent. So we have, in about 20 minutes, created a process from scratch that's useful. You could continue to use maybe your existing systems if you wanted to manually keep up with this. But what we're going to do now is actually extend the process application that we just created here. And we're going to allow us to actually input data and have data flow through the process. And we're going to do that using just IBM BPM tooling. All right, so let's see. We have a process. We have the default implementation. The first thing that we want to do to extend is take this default implementation. That's this right here, and we want to have our own version of this service. So to do that, you go to the Ignition Toolkit, you find the default, and we're just going to copy this to our own process app. So let's see, we're doing interconnect approval process. And here we are. So let's, you know what, first let's rename this, and let's call this, instead of default ignition service, we'll call this interconnect ignition service. All right, very good. So we have the interconnect ignition service here. Let's change all of our implementations to be pointing to that. Interconnect ignition service. All right, so this isn't going to change anything yet about our implementation. We're just pointing to a different service that's exactly the same as the other one. All right, so we've done that. That's good. But let's go ahead and open up this interconnect ignition service. And actually, I'm going to save first. And now that this is in our own process application, we're able to extend this using IBM BPM. Remember, Spark Ignition, like I've said before, it works with IBM BPM. So if you want to do UI, well, IBM BPM has some great UI options. With Spark UI getting built into it, it's getting even better. So if we want to do UI, we can do that. If we want to have variables or data flow, IBM BPM allows you to already do variables and data flow, so you don't need another set of tooling to do that. So let's first just mess with the UI for a little bit. So we're going to open up the coaches here. You're going to see the Spark Ignition coach view will load here. So this is just a template, but if we want to add custom fields to this template, we can do that. So why don't I first, you know what, I like to have some nice style to mine. So we're going to do maybe the customer name, and we're going to add some input groups here. You know what, let's just do one input group. So we'll do this. Let's do a text input. So we'll just have, not the customer name, we'll do the employee name here. So we'll just say text. Let's say this is the employee name. And let's have this appear with, and so these are Spark UI controls, by the way. These are all getting built into IBM BPM soon, but you can still use Spark UI now if you download it from Salient Processes support site. So I'm just going to say user here. All right, so that's good. And we'll have, so we have the employee name here, so that's good. Why don't we add some dates? So we'll have the date picker here. And we'll say this is going to be maybe the arrival date. I have another one here. Say this is the departure date. And then, maybe like a text editor. Sure, we'll say that, see if that works. So text editor, this is going to be reason for going to interconnect. All right, so we're going to save this here, and let's actually see how this works. So we can do this. Let's go ahead and, well, you know what? We could just test this in our process and see how this works. So I'm going to run another process here, interconnect approval. Request trip. Oop, I must have lost the data mapping here. Indeed, I lost this. So this was request trip. This is going to be the action. All right, we're going to run that again. Wrong process. All right, request trip 262. All right, so we have this here, but now you'll see below we have activity content. So I could say Matthew Oates, and then I could have an arrival date and a departure date, and I could have I would like to help out at our booth. So we can have that information here, so that's good. And you know what? I want to have some dates here. I like styling a little bit better, so we're going to do this, but let's just see complete postpone. Yeah, we're good there. Oh, it's telling me I need to complete. So this is all looking very good. So why don't we first go back and let me clean up a little bit of this UI here. So let's go ahead and say, you know what, I really like, I'll do input groups here. I'll do an input group here. The input group just allows us to have different icons next to things. So we're going to say this is going to be a calendar. So far, you'll notice I actually haven't done any coding, and I won't need to do any coding for this whole process app. So we have calendar here, so very good. So we have departure date, arrival date. So this is great. I want to do one more thing here to truly make this Spark Ignition enabled process a little bit more extended, and that's going to be having some data flow here. So I have employee name, arrival date, departure date, and you know what? I'm going to make sure this shows up here correctly. Departure date and arrival date. All right, so we're all good here with the styling and the layout. What I want is to make sure this information that I have is actually captured, so it's backed by some business data, some business objects. First, why don't I create just an interconnect information business object? So interconnect info business object. Again, works with IBM as a principle of ours. So if you want business objects in your process application, why don't you use IBM BPM's business object features? So we have a business object here. We're going to say you need the employee info, or actually we're going to have the employee name, and we're going to have the arrival date. Yep. We'll have the departure date. And we'll have the reason, and we'll store that as a string here. So, all right, good. So now we have a interconnect info business object. What I can do then in my human service is just use that business object. So let's make it an input. So interconnect info. interconnect info there. And we'll have it as an output as well. So if you're not familiar with IBM BPM or just getting started using it, when you have input and output data flows, what that does is allow you to pass information from one service to another or one activity to another activity. And so you'll see that's going to be important when we go back to our process. So I'm going to go back to my process here. I'm going to want that information that I put in request trip to be passed through all the way to trip approval, which means I want to have each of those be able to have inputs and outputs. So I'm going to go ahead and finally, the last thing I'm going to do is create the interconnect info object here. All right. So now let's just map this information. So I have interconnect info. Interconnect info. This was, let's see, it was trip approval. And this was interconnect info. And we'll finish off our process here with trip confirmation. And at this point, once I get done with these mappings, and well, it's been 31 minutes, but I have done some explaining, so I bet you could do all this without describing every little step going on in under 30 minutes here. So we've created this simple process combining Spark UI, Spark Ignition, and IBM BPM in under 30 minutes here. So we have all of this information. This is very good. And why don't I start one more process, and we'll just test this to make sure everything's working. And you know what? I hate it when it says step there. If you want to have that removed, all you have to do is go to your implementation and click on, where is it? It must be hidden here. Yeah, here we go, task header, and we're going to replace this here. If you don't put anything in the subject, it kind of infers the subject from the name of this box, and it adds step to the front, but I don't like the fact that it adds step. So I like to customize it here. I can say trip confirmation. Remember, you can do whatever you want in these subjects. I'm just kind of repeating this here. All right, we'll run it one more time. Very good. Request trip. So here we go. So we have the same information. That's great, but now I can put this. So I could say Matthew Oates, and I can say I'm going to arrive. This year I'm arriving at Interconnect on the Friday, and I'll be leaving on the Thursday. And I can say I have sessions and will be at the booth. All right, so I'm going to complete this. Oh, it's letting me know I need to request the trip from my manager, providing this information. I've done that. Fantastic. So here we go. Now it's going to go to the next step in the process, the trip approval process. So since I've customized it, it's not just going to give me generic information saying, hey, review this. It's actually going to have this information here. And you know what? It's not going to have the information there because I forgot one step. And that's kind of what happens when you do this. I need to bind. I'm sure there are people watching this right now that said they saw this coming a mile away. I forgot to bind my data here. So I have this here. I need to bind the employee name here, and then the date here. And this is actually honestly why I kind of like doing these things from scratch, because what I go into in these videos might be the same things that you see as you're doing development. So you kind of want to know how to fix issues. So that's a classic thing. If for whatever reason you don't see information show up and you expect it to show up that was passed through, it's almost always data binding. In fact, I'm pretty sure that was the first thing I learned when I was trained in Lombardi, was always check your data binding, and I did not do that. But you know what? This is real life here. So if you run into this issue, maybe what I just showed will help you out in fixing your own issue. So here we go. So let's run this process one more time. All right, so we got 265 is the next one. All right, 265, request trip. I'll go ahead and just say this is done, but let me go ahead and put this information in here. So Matthew Oates, and I'll type in the 17th and the 23rd, and I'll say I'm presenting Spark UI and Spark Ignition sessions, and I'll be at the booth. All right, so now that I've done that, now let's see if our information is here. It should be. And sure enough, here we go. So we have that information that was passed from the first step to the second step. If I wanted to complete this, I could have, this information here. I could approve this, and it's going to pass through to the rest of the steps in the process. So at this point, in 36 minutes, including mistakes and talking step by step through what I'm doing, I've been able to create a nice, simple confirmation type process. If you're not going to interconnect, I'm sure you have other processes like this where you have employees or people who just want to request the basic information to get approval. You want visibility into these approvals when they need to happen. You want managers not to have to worry about checking emails. They just need to get a step that they need to approve or deny something and need the information right there. You can do all that with Spark UI, Spark Ignition, and IBM BPM in 36 minutes. We'll give it that. So if you have other questions about Spark Ignition or Spark UI, definitely look at the videos. You can contact us at Salient Process, and looking forward to seeing you at Interconnect. Thanks for watching.